Welcome, everybody. Tonight we're working on the Module 7 lab. I'm going to read through the description here, and then we're going to work on coding this. There's some very specific tasks that are expected for this lab. This lab is also, I think, pretty good preparation for doing the final project. And what you'll see in both this lab and the final project is it's kind of culminating all of the different skills that we've learned during the semester. As I'm kind of coding this, I will show you probably a few new techniques that maybe you hadn't thought about. And the other thing I will say is that when you're coding stuff like this, there's more than one way to do it. Certainly, at least from the standpoint of the structure of the program and how you drive it. Like whether you make the whole thing loop or you're using case statements or if statements, or if you're putting everything into functions, or if you're just writing straight code. And there's no right or wrong, right? If it works, right? And you're accomplishing all the goals here. All right, so let's read through this to make sure we're doing it correctly. So it says, congratulations, you've decided to start your own business. You've been working on your product for a long time, and now you're ready to sell it. Write a program that displays your products and allows users to view product descriptions about each product until they choose to exit. All right, so here's the requirements. To create an abstract class called product that contains the following: 4 properties: the name, the size, the price, and the description. 2 constructors, a no-arg and a 4-arg constructor, an overridden ToString method that prints all 4 properties. All right, and we've had experience doing all of this. I think maybe the part that's a little weird is the abstract class. You guys remember what the abstract class does? What's the difference between an abstract class and a like regular class?
You can't instantiate an object of it.
Precisely. So then Teresa, what's the point then?
I don't know how to use it as a superclass. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
no, that's exactly correct. That is exactly the point of it, right? So that is the point, to use it as a super class and to use its structure, but not necessarily directly create one. So the example that we used during the lecture was pet and dog. You can't really create like a generic pet. It's got to be some type of animal. And so a dog is a subclass of the superclass pet, but pet can never really be instantiated. That's actually a very good explanation. The next thing says a class for your specialized product that can be any school appropriate product you want, must inherit from product, dog and pet, or, in this case, product and salsa, or whatever we want to call it. And it must inherit from product. It must contain at least one additional property, right? So, or else why would you have a subclass? It's kind of thinking. 2 constructors, a no-arg constructor, and a 5 or more arg constructor. And then an overridden ToString, right? The driver class with the main method. So in other words, we're going to be checking that box that says do not show top level statements, which shows the top level statements. I always get confused by that, but we are checking the box so we can see the main method. That's the ideal here. It is possible to write this without, but that's still, in principle, it's still there anyhow. So that's the approach we're going to use. We're going to populate a list with some specialized products. This can be hard coded, and that's probably the better way to do it here. And then we'll have a menu that displays on the screen, giving the user all their choices. And then we're going to give them the option to exit. There is an implication here that we're going to keep putting the menu on the screen, which implies a loop. Everything is going to be inside of a loop of some sort. And it'll be menu driven, right? All that. Then you get extra credit up to 2 points if you do some form of input validation. And I will first do it with no input validation, and then I'm going to show you a technique. And if you watch the videos, you've already seen it, but I'm going to show you that TryParse approach for doing input validation, which I think is a clever, efficient way to do it, in my mind. Right. Here's an example. So they have a sample program run, right? And this does have input validation in it, right? So they get the menu up on the screen, exits at the top, which I think is a little weird, but there it is. and then they have looks like four different kinds of hot sauce or something. You choose one, and then the info comes back up on the screen, right? Telling you what its name is, how hot it is, the price, a little description, maybe the size or whatever the thing may be. Um, and then after that comes up on screen, there's just a little message that pauses you there, right? Press any key to continue, then the menu reappears, right? And then somebody chooses the wrong entry, so you get this little invalid entry message. We'll work up to that, but we want to just get this to work first. And then we keep on going with the example. And then when you exit, you should have a little message. Ideally, it says closing application. Highly subjective. It could say just about anything, really, but just an indicator that it's over. All right. So we do have a very specific list here. So I want to kind of address all of these things one at a time. But I'm going to start with a little piece of advice here. When you start building programs that become more complicated, right? And it's like, oh my God, this is a lot to do. What am I going to do first? Okay, there are strategies. Okay, so here's my strategy, and I always have liked doing it this way because it's worked for me. Some people have the opposite approach, but I think this is generally wise. So the way I look at this is I look at all the stuff that's being asked of me, and I find the easiest things to do first, and I do those. Why? Because I know I can do them, and I get them out of the way, and I'm crossing stuff off the list, right? And then what happens is I feel good about it. Like, look at all the stuff I crossed off the list. And then when I get to the hard part, then I can think about it, and maybe by the time I get there, I've been working it so much already that, oh, that's the solution, right? Um, so this is kind of a general approach I think is pretty wise. But also, like if you were doing this in a team environment, you might have some people that are really good at, I don't know, creating an interface, or some people that are really good at processing the logic or the math or whatever, and you let them specialize on that and you stitch the pieces together. But I still think one of the best ways to proceed is to do the easy stuff first. In other words, like where I would start is I would maybe build the menu structure first, and get that up on the screen, why? Well, we're going to need it anyhow. It's listed at the bottom, but it doesn't mean it has to be the last thing you do, right? I'm also kind of paying attention to the classes here. I mean, given that we're doing class construction, I am going to start there, because then we have the data models that we need. And remember, when you build a class, because it travels with data fields and methods, it really becomes a custom data type. So I think of it, so we're building our data type before we build any of the other stuff. So let's do it like that. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio here to get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. This is very normal steps for us. We're doing a C# console app. I want to put it in the appropriate folders. And this is a subjective choice, of course, but I like putting them here for the semester. I am putting the solution in the same directory, still writing relatively simple programs. We should probably name this. Let's call it Module 7 Lab. And I'm just going to call it Salsa. Why? So I remember in the future, instead of calling it hoodies or whatever I called it last year. And then I'm going to click next. Normally we leave this unchecked. We have most of the semester, but now we're leaving it checked, right? And I'm going to complain to Microsoft someday. You guys need to flip. To me, I think it needs to be flipped, the statement, but whatever. It confused the heck out of me when they added that, by the way. All right. So now we have the main program structure here. And this is where we're going to drive our program from. One thing that I often do here is I think about, like, if I'm going to create a program, what are the steps that are going to happen? And I'm just going to give you like a really basic example. I'm not writing code, and you don't have to copy this, by the way, but like I'm thinking, like this. Okay. So like one thing to do is like if you're going to use some sort of data objects or variables that are needed for the whole program, one of the best places to put them is at the top of the program. That's why a lot of programmers do that, makes them accessible to all the executing parts of the program. So you usually typically do that. Since this is a menu driven program, and then I'm probably going to display the menu, right? Makes sense. And then we'll have our processing steps, right? And then we'll also create output as well. So you guys like notice I'm tying it back to the beginning of the course, input, processing, output, that kind of thing. But this isn't a bad way to proceed. Like if you already have kind of like a roadmap, like first I do this, first I do that, then I do that, why not, right? I don't know if I'm going to do it exactly like this, but generally speaking, I'm kind of going to follow that format. Okay, so you take that for what it's worth. The main issue that we do have now is we do want to create classes, and we're told to create an abstract class on top of it, right? And we can do this a few different ways. The one thing, and if you guys recall, one thing that we could do is we could create it right here, like right here in the spot. So I could, for example, like create a class. They told us what to call it, which was what, product, right? So I could, in this spot here, create an abstract class called product, right? And just have it right in the same file. It's all right here, right? And just do it all in one file. Okay. That's one approach, right? Another approach, and I'm going to show you this approach because, as you kind of move forward professionally, this is really probably the better way to do it. It's sometimes better to actually add a class file, and in other words, add another CS file to the root of our project. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm coming over to the Solution Explorer, and just to kind of reinforce this concept, the Solution Explorer is not a file manager, right? It's exploring the solution. The solution is the collection of all the resources it takes to run and drive and code and all that stuff in a program. The libraries, all that stuff is there. And then when you compile it, the binaries are there too. It's similar to a file explorer, but not exactly. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top of the project here where the module is declared. I'm going to right click and add a class. And I know that we've done this maybe once before. And because I do want to create a class called product, I'm creating a class file. I want you guys to follow with me here, right? I'm going to call this product right here, right? And so instead of putting it in the same code file, I am going to create a standalone file that's going to contain this information. I'll put both the superclass and the subclass all inside this file, right? Under product. All right, so I'm going to add. And now it does travel with a bunch of using statements, right? This is pretty normal. It's probably not going to use any of those, but you do notice that I'm inside the same namespace. Since this is inside the same namespace as the original program file, they can talk to each other, basically, right? And they will find each other. However, here, as I created it, it was called an internal class. I'm going to just change the name of that to, or not the name, but the type to abstract, right? Right. We were given a specific set of properties to add. Like for example, and actually let's go back to the description and just look, right? Name string, size string, price double, description string. Okay, right? All of those. That's pretty simple and straight ahead. So what I did is this, is I built these. I want you to notice with the strings, I have the question mark after, right? What does the question mark do again? It allows it to be null, right? Just in case, so it doesn't error out. All of these are named with capital letters. I'm setting them all to public, right? So they're accessible from outside this class. And each of them has the capability to get and set, right? And I don't know if you guys all did it the same way. Then we were told to do a no arg constructor. All right, so that's pretty simple. So we do public, and we'll say product. So you name it the same as the class, parens, and curlies, right? And okay, we're not given any more information than that. So what would a no-arg constructor look like? Well, I'm going to build the object and I'm not going to put any data in it. That's what it's going to look like. All right, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to kind of do it like this and kind of follow with my thinking here. So the first thing that we're going to set is name. And what's that going to be? Well, I could make it null. It is allowed to be null. I could do an empty string. That's an approach too. But what might be better, and this is just an opinion thing, mind you, um, sometimes instead of putting null or something like that, I actually put in some text that has meaning so that something comes back and it unknown tells me, oh, there's nothing in there. I get it, right? Rather than null, you know. And null kind of puts you down this pathway of problems anyhow. Just a fair word of advice. Right, so I'm doing one for name, one for size, price is a double. So let's just set that to, well, a number. How about zero, right? If we don't know the price, it should be zero. And then description, and I'm not going to do unknown on that, right? Maybe we could go TBD, to be determined. All right, this is our no arg constructor. Okay. All right. The next thing that we want to do is have a, I think it's a 4-arg constructor is what it said, and pretty intuitive, right? We're just going to take all the fields that we have and build a constructor that handles all of them, right? All right. Little bit of a thought here. Should this also be public? Any thoughts on that, anybody? Should it be public? Should it be protected for any reason?
I think it should be public.
A little louder, Anthony.
Public?
Okay, Anthony's saying public. Anybody have an issue with that? Yeah. I will tell you when I coded it, I made it protected. I don't remember why I did that, honestly, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. But I'll follow with Anthony's suggestion. So if this fails, Anthony, it's all on you. All right. And okay, so here we go. I was just going to go over to my other screen and copy over the stuff, which is, guess what? Exactly what's coming up on the screen, right? So tab, right? I'm just going to take it all, and it did the whole thing for me. Did you guys catch that? With one key press. Let go, let Visual Studio, basically, right? To kind of like play on a pun. But yeah, I mean, hey, you know, if the IDE is doing it for you and it's doing it correctly, you should ride with it, folks. And you know, this isn't, and I want to have you mind this. This isn't AI, right? This isn't Microsoft's Copilot, which actually writes the code for you. But man, is it close, right? And it is the future we're moving into. We're also told to create a ToString method, right? So we are going to say public, remember this, override, right? It'll be a string, ToString. It once again read my mind. And I think I'm missing my closing curly bracket there. Yeah, I am. I don't know what happened there, but let's add it. And basically, we're just going to return all the values. So I had written, here, let's do this. Return, what, no suggestions? I'm like waiting for it to auto type all my stuff now. You know, that's pretty sad to say. But you know what? Here, I am going to string interpolate. So I'm just going to use this statement here. It really doesn't know what I want to return, but this is what I did. So we're sending back the name, the size, whatever that happens to be relative to salsa. I guess large, medium, small. I guess I could make it 8-ounce or 3-ounce or whatever those little hot sauce bottles are. The price in currency format, and then a carriage return with a description, right? That's how I'm going to do it, right? Is that how the output was here? I mean, you do have a model. Yeah, right. So name, size, and price. Well, here I have heat level hot. Okay, I guess I gotta accommodate for that. Well, this isn't, okay, this is an abstract class. Okay. You guys feel where I'm going with that? It might not be the whole thing. All right, but we do have a ToString method added to it. So this is the superclass, abstract class called product. All right, so hopefully you guys are good with that. So for the screenshotters here, top part of it, bottom part of it. All right. Now we need to think about the subclass. Now the subclass could also go, and I'm just saying this out loud, it could also go in its own file. So I could create a subclass called salsa, put it in its own file, and have it extend product, right? And that would all work automatically. And in most circumstances, I would just follow that approach. But given that this is relatively simple, I'm going to just add the class file here, but I'm saying it out loud so that if you guys are wondering that, please know that you could. I could create another CS file that would have the name of salsa with a capital S .cs, then put this class in it, and it would work great. Extending product, right? So the correct terminology is salsa inherits from product. You can think of product as the parent class, salsa as the child class, or super and sub, etc. And there's many different names and they're all correct. All right. Now, I also was told I need to add a property to this that is unique, that isn't included in the super class. So what I thought of with the salsa, and I think it's implied, right, is that I create a string and then I'm going to have basically this data field that is the heat level, and I'll have a get and a set. Now, I know I'm doing this with a string, but hot sauces are often measured in what Scoville units. I don't know if anybody's into hot sauce, and like the more insane the Scoville units, the more of a fool you are for consuming it, apparently, or the more of a man you are. But it is kind of like this thing that people do get way into. I had some friends that were just off the charts with it, honestly. They would like eat habaneros, for fun, basically. All right, so then we need a constructor here as well, and you notice once again it didn't complete my curly brackets, so I'm gonna complete the curly brackets. I'm not sure why it's doing that exactly, but we're going to basically have, okay, so if there's no constructor, a no-arg constructor, I'm going to assume that the hot sauce isn't very hot. That's my approach. So I'm going to say, if they don't declare it, so nothing is declared, then the heat level will equal mild, meaning it's not habanero hot. Right. Yeah, and I think that's so weird with the constructor there. It should really look like that by Microsoft standards. Now, they also want us to build, and if you go back here, they say a no arg and a 5 or more arg, right? Because, okay, so I'm setting heat level, right? But I could also add other data fields to it if I wanted. So we're going to have the 4 that we originally used that have to go up to the super class. And then whatever we add here also has to be added. That's why there's a minimum of 5, by the way. So if I once again do public, call it salsa, it should, and I'm trying, it didn't pick up on it. Okay. It's kinda, but not quite. And it's not the order that I want. Yeah, I'm copy pasting at this point, and I'm doing this, right? And remember that if you're sending some of these up to the super class, there's a technique you're supposed to use, and I'm going to do that down here, and I'm going to say base, and notice how it's recognizing it automatically that the name, size, price, and description go up to the super class. So I'm just going to accept it. because that's correct. So we're feeding in all those data fields. Heat level is going to be handled locally, and the name, size, price, and description are going up to the superclass. Right. I do need my curlies here, and then okay, yeah, that's what I was going to do. Heat level. So I'm going to send in the heat level in this circumstance. So I'm thinking like mild, medium, hot, extra hot, and maybe insane or something like that. Insane hot. Or what was that? What did they say in? Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of that movie. Never mind. It's probably in poor taste. Anyhow, all right. So I think this is pretty good for our subclass. We also are supposed to include a ToString method for this one. Boy, it's just like totally reading my mind, right? So hey, let's just roll with it. And it did forget the closing curly bracket, so I'm gonna put it in. And we just want to do a return statement here that includes all the previous stuff, but also the heat level in the mix. So this is what I did. So I did the name, the size in parentheses, right? Because that's what the example was, with the price after a comma. And then on a new line, the heat level, right? And on another new line, the description. And I think that's a nice layout, actually, right? So it like spreads it out, and it will end up looking like, this. This is kind of the point. Right? That's the example. All right. This file is done. I'm just going to do a Control S to save. And our classes are built, and none of the using statements are needed, by the way, but no harm done. How do I know they're not needed? If you can tell, right? Let's see how white that text is and how gray, excuse me, that text is. It shows that these aren't being used, right? If you want to like make sure of that, you can get rid of them. And if you get all sorts of little red things that pop up, right? But as a general, you can leave them. It's not going to harm anything, right? If they're there. So, if you're wondering, I'm just saying that kind of for the benefit of anybody watching this in the aftermath. Now we're going to go back to our main program method here. We're going to start building the flow of logic for the actual program. Since we were told to do very specific things, I want to go back and kind of refer to it for a second. So I think we did all this and we did all that. That's a lot of bullets crossed off already, right? And see, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, like, that you achieve the stuff that you can without like overwhelming yourself. Did you guys find any of these tasks difficult to understand? No, these are all pretty pedestrian, I think, right? And sometimes I take that for granted. I do this all the time as well. So of course, I think it's easy, right? So I don't mean to, imply anybody's not getting it. All right. But next we'll go to the driver class with a main. So in other words, we already have that. It's a program that's got a main method. And then what's inside that main method, the reason they call it a driver class is that's the only stuff that will execute, right? So if we put it in that main method, it will trigger it to run. So the first thing it says is populate a list with some specialized products. This may be hard coded, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. So let's build the data objects, and I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to leave these directives here, and I'm going to start to build a list. And okay, so let's talk about this. Why a list? Right, we were having this convo right before class started, Teresa and Jacob, right? Right. Okay, because you could use an array, right? And what is the list going to hold? Is it going to hold strings? Yeah. No, it's not going to hold strings. It's going to hold product objects. That's what it's going to hold, right? So we're going to hold products inside there, and those products will include the subclass of salsa, right? But it's going to be of type product because that's a superclass. So here I'm going to say product. So it's a list of products, and I'm going to call it salsas, like that, right? And new list product parens. Yes, we're going to do all that. Okay. So why salsas and not salsa? Well, because it's going to be a list of products. What does that list contain? Various types of salsa. Altogether, they are salsas. And there's kind of like this whole like little planning like that programmers do, is they name things like singular and plural for a reason, not by mistake, right? And this is an example of naming it plural because it is going to hold a plurality of salsas, you know. Now the next part, and this is the part that is subjective, right? So like if you watch my example from last year, it was hoodies and t-shirts and caps. This year I'm following the on-screen example, which is do salsas. And so basically I construct them like this, right? Now I want you to notice here that I put a semicolon in here, right? And okay, that's fine to do it like that. And then I can just one at a time say, come up with a salsa, give it a name, put it in a variable, and then put that in the list. I just want you kind of like to imagine this in your brain. Or you could do this. You can get rid of that semicolon, put it in a set of curly brackets, right? Spread those curly brackets apart. And now, yeah, so like Visual Studio is starting to pick up on where I was going with this. But I'm not going to create a new product in this case. Now I'm going to create a new salsa singular. And I'm going to feed it values. So for example, and these values all come from the example. So I basically copied them from, the assignment description, some of them at least. And here's what I have. Oh, nope, that is not what I have. Control Z. Here's my paste. So I have a new salsa, scorpion sting. It's small. It's $5.99. It talks about the chili peppers, and the heat level is scorching, or like Dave's Insanity sauce. I want to do another product and put it in my product list, right? So it's following my pattern. So now really all I have to do is get the info inside there. And so I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to do another one. And yes, I have this all pre-typed. So that is by intent because I didn't want to sit here and type it all manually. And what you're putting in here will be relevant to the product that you're working with, right? So like if you do the, t-shirt example, for example, then, and I want to make sure that I didn't mess up my stuff here. Sorry, folks. Almost deleted my stuff on the other screen. And then once you have the last one in, don't put a comma after it. Tidy up your list here and then put a semicolon at the end. So this is one complete statement. So this is kind of a brute force way to do this, right? The other approach would be I could also, and think about this, I could create another interface. This is the difference basically with the final project and this assignment, is that the final project, you create an interface to be able to enter the information, right? Here, we're hard coding it. I'm not even putting it in variables. I'm just forcing it right into the list. And because salsa, here's the other takeaway, because salsa is a subclass of product, yeah, I can go into the product list. Now, many of you will probably think, okay, well, I'll create a list of salsas, right? That's fine too, actually, right? But because salsa is a subclass, it does work with this approach. And this is kind of like the double takeaway on this. All right. We are going to ask it now to display a menu. I mean, that's kind of coming up, but I have other data objects I want to create. And so like the one data object that you might forget about is when you're creating the menu and you're giving people the option to enter menu stuff. I mean, basically you're hoping that they type this number, right? And well, it's a number, it's an integer. So maybe I should create a variable that holds it. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. And so I'm going to create an int. I'm just going to call it input. You can call it choice, you can, whatever. And I could give it a value. I could leave it unassigned right now. However, if I leave it like this, it's not really going to like it. It's going to give me that green underline, and if you read it, it says it's declared but never used, and it doesn't groove with that basically. And so I could like set it to 0, but what would happen? Well, it would exit right away. So none of the numbers that are up on the screen are negative. So why don't I preset it to a negative number? This is kind of a goofy little hack, by the way, right? This is just to ensure that it's not going to automatically trigger a menu choice. And I would call this optional, right? You don't have to do it like this. So these are the data objects. The other thing, okay, well, I'm going to display a menu, but here's kind of a design step that we didn't think about. Okay, or maybe you did think about it, and I did mention it. But if I display the menu and they do a choice and we put the info on the screen, then they can press a key and go back to the menu. Okay, they can go back to the menus. That's kind of my key point, which is, loop all this basically is kind of my thought. And if it helps you, kind of like a pseudo code, and I'm just doing it right here in my code to help guide me as I'm building like what stuff I'm doing next. So if I'm going to loop all this, I need a loop structure, right? Yeah. So this is really well suited, I think, to while loops. When you're waiting for user input to get out. Two approaches. One is you could do a do while loop, do all the stuff at least once, check at the bottom. That's totally doable. So if you did it that way, kudos, or you could do a regular while loop where we force it to run and then give people a selection statement somewhere inside there so they can pop out with a break. And we've done that before. And that's the approach I'm going to use. So I'm going to just say while true, right? And I'm going to go ahead and close my curlies right away because I just have this tendency, if I don't, I mess things up. All right. So we're looping all this, right? So I mean, I could do that, I guess. I'm just going to delete that now because I know there's my loop. But the next thing I'm going to do is display the menu, right? And if you will, right, I could write a function called display menu. I usually like to call it display menu. When I coded it earlier today, I called it print menu. So I'm going to go with that. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm just going to say print menu. And then what I want it to do is automatically look at my list of salsas. Follow me here, right? Because right now I'm throwing 4 in there, but it could be 100, right? Or 20 or something like that. And then have it print the menu based on what's actually in the product list, as opposed to hard coding it, right? So I'm going to actually send salsas into it, and okay, and it wants to receive the input too, but I'm not doing it there, and I'll show you why. You could do that actually. So I'm going to print menu salsas. Okay, it's saying, hey, you know what? You don't have that. All right, remember this trick I showed you, right? You can actually use like the auto fix, and it can generate the method called print menu for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. Isn't it a lovely world we live in, right? Okay, so here it is, and now it's going to, of course, receive the data type of list of products called salsas. It's going to receive that. And this is thrown in automatically whenever you automatically create one of these. Normally, I would say that I don't really need private static here, but that's fine, right? All this is really going to do is put stuff up on the screen. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this message. And I'm going to think of what this is going to look like. All right, so let's go back. And what they have is salsa, little, dotted dash line there. All right, and then they start to display stuff. But let's handle the top part first. I think that's really ugly, so I'm going to do a dash line on top and a dash line on the bottom. That's me, right? So here's my console write line for that. That's just a simple output statement. So I'm doing it like this. Dot, dot, dot. Next line, salsa menu. Next line, dot, 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 dot. Next line. And then notice, okay, I'm also putting the exit statement in right away too. Why? Okay, here's the answer. Because that's not in my salsa list. Everything else on that salsa list will automatically populate because it's in the list. So I'm not going to okay, so for example, I could do console write line 1 equals, ghost sauce, 2 equals, whatever, mean green or whatever I call those, right? And I could just hard code it. Yeah, I could do that. But wouldn't it be better that if I had a list that was growing and changing, that the code that I write here just dynamically adjusts to it? Yeah, that would always be the smarter choice. And this is another takeaway. So don't hard code if you can extract the list that we want to put up on the screen from the products in the list themselves. You see, right? So, and I think this is a really clever approach. I'm going to write a for loop to do that. So I'm going to say, yeah, int I equals 0. That's fine. For I is less than or equal to salsas dot count. Yeah, I think that's right too. Although I wrote it with products dot count because so I'm going to tweak that a little bit. So I'm going to call this because I want the count that's in the products list. Or no, I don't know if that's right. Okay, hold on a second here. And so I'm scrolling back up here. I did call it salsas, right? Right. I did call it salsas. So let's go with what it suggested. And then if this doesn't work, then I'll blame myself. So now the point of this is we want it to reach into the list and for every entry, output the name preceded by number. So we are going to console write line. And then what we're going to do, let's string interpolate. So get your $sign in there. And then I'm going to say, well, I want it to display the number at the beginning. Whatever the first position is, that's 0, right? On I starts at 0. And I guess I could have started I at 1, but I'm just going to leave it at this point. But I'm going to just say I plus 1 because the first item is going to be number 1, right? And then, well, we want to put a period after it. I think there's a period after it. And then we're going to show the item in the salsas list in position I. And then we want to display its name property, right? Or its name field. That's what we want it to show. And then close the curly bracket. I think that'll work, right? Then we want to close our parens and a semicolon. Oh, except you got to spell salsas correctly. There you go. Okay, so I'm seeing why I called it products before, because here Visual Studio decided to call this the same name as my list above, and I'm not really comfortable with that. It'll still work. All right, so I'm just thinking about this really carefully. Let's just call it, I'm going to call it products just on purpose. So I am going to call this, that's the why. That's why I had a difference. So if you guys are copying me, sorry, you can make the same tweak I just made. All right, so we got the console. This is going to output each item and number it for as many items as I have in the list. And then after it puts that up on the list, that's just going to run and be done, right? Is the print menu thing done? Okay, so I'm going to go back and take a look here. So it's going to say, okay, this stuff is in the first console right line. This is being printed by the for loop, right? Numbered and printed by the for loop. And then it outputs this, waiting for, or sort of prompting, waiting for a capture of information. This is going to happen every time the menu comes up. Think about it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console right line here, and I'm just going to, inside of double quotes, do a \n to move down the line, and then say, choose a product. And do a little prompt like that. But okay, this is a prompt, so I'm not going to right line, I'm going to write. So the cursor flashes right after. Okay. And now, thought here, right? What you guys recall when I was up here creating the call to the method, that it wanted to put the input thing in there because it was anticipating that it would send the input back with it, like move the input back and forth. That's not how I'm going to do it. So normally when I do a prompt, I usually do the read line right after. But nobody says that it has to be here. In fact, I'm going to do the read line up here. After, because this part, I mean, this doesn't really process the information, it just puts the stuff on the screen. Who's to say the read line can't happen there? It's going to, basically. So this is the print menu method. All right. So then back up here, I'm now going to capture the information, and I already have my variable called input, and I'm going to do, well, it needs to be an int. So I'm converting to int and doing a console read line. And folks, this is a great spot to take a break right now. So let's do a 5-minute break. We've been going for an hour already. So I'm going to pause the recording. All right, we're back from break, and I did a little cleanup on my data objects up here. And I was making the point that once we get everything working, I might add a product or two to show you that the list is dynamic in size and it will grow automatically. So that's totally a possibility. But for right now, let's just kind of review where we're at. We have our superclass, abstract superclass, and a subclass defined here in this file. We have our driver program, which creates a list of products containing salsas. We preset a variable for our user interface. We set up a loop to keep the program running. We set up a print method, which puts the menu up on the screen dynamically, prompts the user, and then when we come back, we capture the input here. All right. Now, the next thing that I did in mind, and this is for a number of reasons, this is aesthetic, mind you, is I had it just print out a blank line because I didn't like things touching. I like a little space between my stuff. That's just me. So that's just for a blank line. Then I went into an if statement, and I started checking the input, right? So if the input is equivalent to 0, okay, what happens if it's 0? Well, that's the exit option, right? So the first thing I'm going to check is like, do they want out of here? All right, so I'm going to do that. I am going to break, but first I'm going to console right line and just give them kind of a message. I'm going to do a \n here for a blank line and say closing application, or whatever exit message you want to give them. And then I'm going to put a couple extra blank lines at the bottom. That's my personal preference. You don't have to do that, by the way. I think it just looks nicer, right? And if they choose 0, we want to get out of this loop. So we're going to issue a break statement, and then we're going to close our curly bracket here. So that's our if. So if they choose 0, we're out of here, right? It's at the top of the menu. That's one of the reasons I'm putting it there. But also, since it's the top of the menu, we don't want it processing other stuff first. We want it, if they want out, let's get them out of here, right? That's kind of my thought. All right. Then the next if statement would be to, and we got to think about the logic of this now. If they put in a valid number, okay, so a couple different ways to check this, right? Um, and I'm going to show you what I think is an easy way to do this, right? And then I'm going to show you, like the way you probably think of doing it, and then I'm going to show you the way that I demonstrated in last year's video with the TryParse method. But let's do this approach first, the simple approach, or at least seemingly simple approach. And I'm going to go ahead and check to see if the input is greater than zero. Because if it's zero, we're out, right? Keep in mind I preset it to -1, so none of the stuff would trigger by mistake. Okay, so if it's greater than zero, and so double ampersand, if the input happens to be less than or equal to the salsas dot count. So in other words, as long as we're less than the number of salsas, right? So I don't know like what the top limit's going to be. I don't want to hard code this to like 4, right? You guys feel where I'm going with this, right? I want it to be dynamic. This is how I make it dynamic. It's counting what's in the list to tell me what the last entry is, or the last possible value. And okay, so what would we do in this circumstance? Well, we want to output the product, right? And so we're gonna console write line. We're gonna say salsas, and man, is it smart. Okay, and I'm not gonna do a ToString, right? So you could kind of do it that way, but we wanted to output, think about this, the first item in the list, right? Or we wanted, okay, so no, I'm trying to explain this incorrectly. We want it to take whatever item the user chose. So if they chose item number 1, the index value in the list is 0. So I have to subtract 1 from it for it to display. See what I'm saying? Okay. Then the next thing is that ToString thing. You guys notice how that popped up automatically. What I'm going to tell you is whether I say ToString or not, that is the method that is operating. You guys remember that part from the lecture? So like ToString, I can manually invoke it like this. I can do that and it'll pull it back. But if I omit it, the whole point of a ToString method is it will automatically operate anyhow. That's pretty clever, I think, right? So it's just going to read that item and put it on the screen. So we can test it both ways, but if you're not believing, try it, and a lot of people don't recall that. Okay, not what I typed. Thank you. And otherwise, and I don't think that I really even need the curly brackets here, right? Because I'm going to do one console statement. What's going to be my entry here? What's my else? Error, basically, right? I'm going to say, and I might say \n. I didn't do that last time. Let's just do invalid. I can type it, entry. Okay. So it's going to do an invalid entry. I like how it indented it to where it didn't want it to go. And why is that happening? Oh, I see. Because I put a curly bracket here. All right, there we go. So remember, if there's only one statement inside of an if and only one statement inside of an else, you can omit the curly brackets. You guys remember what my rule of thumb for that was? Don't. Generally I tell people don't omit the curly brackets because invariably you add stuff and then you forget that they're not there or whatever. I tried to do it without, but I still had one in. So that's the kind of goofy stuff that happens. All right, but this is valid as a standalone if else, right? Now, after they do that, right, whether it's putting the salsa name on the screen or giving me an invalid entry return, Then I want to put a message up on the screen. If you look at the example, right, whether it's invalid or gives you the thing, then it says press any key to continue. So I need that part. And so what I do for that is very simple. We just do a console write, like a prompt, right? And then we do a read line, and then it moves on. Notice I'm putting in extra carriage returns. I like to have space in my programs. I just think it looks nicer. It's purely an aesthetic choice. So this is the loop that will continuously run and display that menu. So like remember our processing stuff that we, our pseudo code, that was the display menu part. That'll keep, this will put the menu on the screen, take the choices and respond. But is there another processing step we need to do, or is this all of it? Is this program only going to give us a listing of what's in the list? Okay, if you guys are questioning your brain there, yeah, mostly that's what it's doing, you guys. What else is it doing? It's either displaying an item if it's there, or it's giving me an error message if it's not, or it's letting me leave. It's not letting me do, I can't add a product, delete a product, edit a product. I can't do any of that stuff. But I hope that what you're feeling from that is those are the next steps, and that's where the final project takes us, is those capabilities. So this becomes kind of a little bit of a blueprint for the final project in a sense. And so what I'm saying is we're really close to being done here, aside from the other validation option. And you might think there should be a whole lot more code, but there isn't. This is all the code. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run this. This is really the part that's kind of doing all the work, if you guys aren't picking up on it, right? The while loop is kind of running everything. I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to run it, and let's see if it works okay-ish, right? Without an extreme amount of confidence, right? All right, so there's the menu. It doesn't look too bad. Looks okay-ish, right? So let's try to exit. Okay, it worked. Great. Let's run the program again, right? Prove that works. All right. Notice that it is pulling up the products, right? Just fine. And we'll pull up one. Okay. Any key to continue? I'm back to the menu. Now I'm going to try 2, 3. Just making sure it matches up with the list item. Like if the list says 1 and it's bringing back, no, it's working all right. Then we're going to do our mean green. Now I'm going to give it a value that's outside the range, like 5. Okay, seems to be working all right. Don't you think? So I'm going to go ahead and exit. And all right. Here's my question for you. One of the extra credit opportunities is to check for a valid entry, right? Am I not doing that? Yeah, I am actually. What would be the one thing that would break it? Does anybody know what would break it?
A non-number.
You said a prime number?
A non-number.
Oh, a non, yes, right. Grayson, pretty spot on, right? So like all right, so like for example, I'm like, right, yeah, there it is, broken, right? So, all right, that is actually problematic, for sure, right? And we can code our way around that. That's not really the main point of this though, but we have a different way that we can do the validation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out a few spots here in my code and then replace it with some alternate statements to show you a different approach, right? So I'm still going to capture the input, like whatever choice they make, I'm capturing it. That's going to happen no matter what. But here's I'll label this as a alternate validation approach. All right. And actually, I am going to comment this out. So I'm going to comment that out. And here's how I'm going to proceed. So I'm okay. So now I'm like waffling on this again. No, well, we'll figure it out here in a second. But what I do want to do is I want to show you the TryParse method. And basically, TryParse is a method that will read the read line. And if it's valid, we can capture it or convert it to whatever format that we need. And then we will output the input if it's valid. Okay, this is kind of a weird kind of thing to say, right? So in other words, we're watching what the user types. If it's valid, we convert it to a number, and then we take that and we output it to the correct variable. And while we're doing that, we're going to set a Boolean variable called valid. And I'm going to do it like this. I'm just going to type it all out and I'll show you what I mean. We are ultimately going to convert it to an int. We're going to try parse. And the way that try parse works is I first put in what it's parsing. And basically what it's going to parse is a console read line. So I'm just going to feed in a console read line in there. So it's going to parse. And by the way, the word parse in computer speak means to read through text. That's what it means, right? Reading through the text. So it's going to read through the read line. And if the read line is valid, it's going to output the input that we're capturing like that, right? So this is really weird syntax. It took me a while to kind of get this one. But it's also setting a flag to true or false. So in other words, if this sets to false, right? This isn't going to work correctly, right? So, and I'll show you how that operates. All right, so let's move down here now. In order to test that, I need a different if statement here because I'm not just checking the number. Now I'm also checking to see if it's valid. So instead of using this if, I'm going to write a new one, right? You can leave the old one there. And here's my new one. So I'm going to check two things now. I'm going to check, is it valid? Is it a valid entry? And does the input equal 0? Then we'll exit. So it's doing two checks at once. And this is why this is a really cool approach. And I think a lot of like modern developers do it this way as kind of a preferred way to do it rather than the way that we've been doing it. And it comes with experience, frankly. So like, don't feel bad if this isn't what you thought of. That's totally normal. And since we altered the first if statement, we're going to alter the second one as well, right? And I'm going to re-engineer that one to also include the valid thing in there. It's basically the same statement, right? So we're checking to see, is it valid? And I want you to notice this is a complex and statement. That's what I'm calling it, right? So is it valid? And is this and statement also true? Because that has to be true too. It's got to be in range and it needs to be valid. Okay. So now with these three changes, the thought is that we should be able to capture it now. Okay, let's try this and see if it works. I have no red flags or anything like that. Saving. Here comes the run. Hopefully it launches, right? It's always like Pensa is going to launch. All right, so let's type 1. Still works. 2, 3, 4. I think we know exit probably will work, but we should test it. Okay, that worked. Let's go back in now and try to break it, right? Let's put in a value out of range. That still works just fine. Now let's try text. Aha. Do you see the difference, right? So it's parsing it, looking to see. All right, and I'll highlight the line here. So it's parsing it, comes in as a string. It's converting it to an integer. If that returns a valid result, it marks this true, meaning it can convert to an integer. Otherwise, it's going to mark it false. It'll still send the input forward, right? But if it's marked false, none of the if statements will run true, right? And so it'll give us the error state. So that is a great way to make sure people aren't putting in text without getting overly complicated. It's a very simple statement, right? We're just throwing in another Boolean. We're throwing in a Boolean that we're checking, and we're still capturing the same input and moving it forward in the program. I'm going to go ahead and exit, but I think this lab is complete. So once again, all right, here's my list. All right, here's my while loop that kind of runs everything with the revised validation. Now remember, if you include this revised validation, it will give you some extra credit. So if you turn it in with that, make sure you notate that you're turning it in for extra credit. And then the print menu. The one thing that we didn't try, and you know what, I think we owe it to ourselves to try this, is to add another product. So isn't there like Dave's Insanity sauce, if you guys have ever heard of that? It's kind of a famous one. Don't know what that one sells for, but we will make up the price. And what else do we have to add here? The heat level, we'll call it insane. Insane hot. How about that? Right. And close the print. Right. So remember, the whole reason I'm doing this is to make sure that we can add a product and it will dynamically adjust. And did I miss a field here? Oh, I missed the size. Okay, that's why it's underlining red. So we'll call it small. Most good hot sauces come in small bottles, by the way. Ask me how I know. All right, so saving. So let's run it again. Now let's see if our menu automatically expanded, right? And notice I didn't have to change any of the other code. If I set my code up correctly, it will dynamically adjust. And so in principle, I could make this as large a list as I would like, and it would work every time. And I think that's proof that it works there. All right, folks, let me go ahead and terminate the video. So this video ends here. This is the solution.